I might start with a question to get our panelists thinking. This, as Karen has mentioned, we have been across the country with versions of this event over a number of years now. So I would estimate, Karen, we've probably done about a dozen of these or so, right? Close to a dozen. And with incredible mixes of panelists, artists, musicians, furniture makers, foresters, First Nations representatives, just an incredible number of perspectives. And I wonder, Karen, if you want to just think back over what we've done in the last few years and what's surprised you the most about the response we've had from the audiences in all those cities?
Well, you know, it's been interesting because every city you can see has a different flavor. So, you know, we were just in Montreal last week doing Why Forests Matter, and there were 20 people lined up at the mics, Toronto.
They were brave.
You know, and most of them wanted to make a very passionate statement or ask a very passionate question. You know, we went to Halifax and nobody stood up. Just like here at the moment. But then after at the reception, they said, well, we're shy. So then we were all mobbed afterwards. But, you know, the reality is that we have different cultural approaches in the city, but everybody has expressed similar love and concerns and passion for conservation.
Excellent, thank you. Can we start on this side, please?
I think that guilted us into standing up with a few questions. If you could give each of you a piece of advice to educators who are trying their best to inspire children to care about nature and to be those conservationists who 150 years from now will be, as you said, Dan, leaving their legacy in conservation, what would you give as your recommendations or your advice from each of you, actually? I'd be interested.
That's a great question. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I guess my advice, I have kids of my own. They're now university age, and it's been a real pleasure to take them out in the woods like Richard Loeb talked about in his video. One of the things I find in my business, I'm a wildlife biologist by training, I think that we don't think enough about where everything comes from that we use every day. Everything that we use every day is either grown or mined. Think about it. And if we reuse those products responsibly, less waste, look for certified products, look for things that take care of the environment. If we can encourage our children to think about where did that fish come from that you ate for dinner? Where did that piece of paper come from? How about the chair you're sitting in? I think if we can inspire the kids to think about what it is they're using every day and they can connect the dots from what they're using every day to nature, where it came from, then they'll have a source of appreciation for that nature. I also personally ascribe to going out for a walk in the woods or a horseback ride or a scuba dive or whatever. I think those are all good opportunities, and I think if you can make an effort to get out with those kids, and I don't know how that works as a teacher, but a couple of times a year in the different seasons and get their feet muddy and their hands cold and do those things. I don't think kids do that enough these days.
Wonderful, thank you. As in opening a forest school, perhaps, too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But I'll let the other
Well, I'll just quickly say two things. I would say that the one thing is that not just kids, but I think all Canadians need to recognize just how rich we are in forests. I mean, something that I think to us seems quite common and widespread in our country is, from a global perspective, a really rare and dwindling resource. And you know, we really are this forest nation that's quite unique in the world, and we should be proud of that heritage. The other thing with kids is, you know, Indigenous people used to do this thing called a vision quest, right? Now, probably as a teacher, you can't leave your kids on some island in the Great Lakes for a couple weeks, but you know, even just having kids sit for half an hour alone in the woods can change them, and I think it can kind of change their relationship. And even when they're back in the hectic city, they'll go back to that place.
And I'll just say a little bit different to add. These guys have been great. Let's just not forget that we live in an urban forest here in Toronto, and most of our kids and grandkids experience the forest in the city. And you know, that's nothing to be sneezed at. So getting our kids outdoors in the city and appreciating that the environment isn't something you go and visit on vacation, it's actually all around you, I think is a great first step to enable some of the other.
I was just going to say that being somebody that's allergic to tree pollen, the urban forest can be something to sneeze at. Sorry, that's like sometimes you just walk into them, right? Like the joke is waiting. I wanted to say, I think what's important to emphasize is that we don't exist separate from nature. I think too much of the language that we use, even within conservation movements or environmental movements, is just talks about nature as something that's out there. And so I think to emphasize to everyone that we are part of it, we don't stand separate from it. We're certainly shaping, but we're in it. And I think putting a strong emphasis, particularly if you're in a city like Toronto or larger urban centers, that nature, we're in it, and things we tend to historically think of as existing outside of urban centers is very much here. So some of the areas with the highest levels of biodiversity are in urban areas. Some species that are at risk survive better within urban areas than they do outside of urban areas. Honeybees, for example. Certain species are thriving in close proximity to us and in these urban centers. So I think, just to echo what was said, like remembering that the cities themselves are vibrant spaces and that we're part of it. We don't stand outside, like in a way, like nature doesn't, often we get this language about saving nature. Well, we're part of it, and it's also nature isn't like thinking like we do. It's like, doesn't necessarily care about us. And I think that's important too.
Thank you. On this side, please.
Thank you very much. My name's Craig Applegath. I'm an architect and urban designer. And I spend a lot of my time now thinking about how we're going to regenerate and maintain natural capital in the face of climate change. So specifically to Dan, I'd like you to talk maybe a bit about how the Nature Conservancy is going to be dealing with the reality of climate changing and therefore the environmental conditions for our forests changing around them. And what will that mean, and what part will we play in possibly being stewards now that we've caused the damage in the first place? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question, and something that we've certainly been wrestling with at the Nature Conservancy of Canada. Nature conservation in many ways is sort of a two-for-one solution to climate change. The one part is that by restoring and protecting forests and wetlands, we're storing carbon, and we're kind of keeping that carbon storage engine running, which is important. The other thing around conservation and restoration is that we can do things that are going to help us adapt to the climate change that we're seeing now and that we're going to see in the future. So we know that the 100-year storm now occurs every 5 years. We know that this was the warmest year that we've seen on record. Last year was the second warmest. But conservation can help both cities and nature adapt to some of those changes. So by doing things like restoring stream banks, by protecting wetlands, we can help to buffer some of the effects that cities and communities will see from climate change. By connecting protected areas, we can help species and habitats to be able to shift to various climate changes that we're going to see.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. On this side of the room, yes.
Oh, this is for Ms. Whistler. This is based on something that I'm imperfectly recalling, but it's a question I'd like to set at rest. I was quite pleased to see a business as vast as TD working so directly to conserve the natural environment. But I seem to recall reading somewhere that TD is one of several banks backing a major pipeline being sort of up for development in the States. I think it was the Dakota Access. I just wondered how that was connected to the forest conservation.
Well, I can't say I'm surprised to hear your question. In fact, I was expecting it, as these guys all know. It is true that we finance natural resource development, and so that is part of the complexity of modern life. And I'm the chief environment officer in the bank. I'm a scientist. I think we're on transition to a low carbon economy, but we're not there yet. And so I don't see the world as black and white right now, and I think we're going to have to recognize that you can conserve and you can also support hopefully responsible development. This particular issue is one that we have grave concern about, and I can tell you I've been on the phone with the Dakota Sioux today about it. So life is not simple.
Right. Thank you for your question. On this side?
Thank you. I have a question in regards to land ownership and land conservation. Does the panel think that it's, I suppose, sorry, more to the point is, how does the split between government ownership of land and creation of national parks and provincial parks and the like versus, things like yourselves and other institutions and the public really outside of government owning these lands? How do you see that path going forward for land ownership?
Anne, you want to talk about that?
Well, the short answer is we need both. Traditionally in Canada, government has played a huge role in areas where there's a lot of crown land. So most of our national and provincial parks, especially recently that have been established, have been in northern areas. Nature Conservancy of Canada has traditionally focused in areas of private land where we can operate very efficiently. And increasingly, Indigenous communities are having a huge role in our northern areas in terms of protecting areas as well. So, and corporations as well. I mean, we all need to protect those areas that need to be protected. And forestry as well, Andrew and I were just talking about how the forest industry, there's actually a huge area that they conserve as set-asides that are required under either Crown Forestry Acts or under requirements to be certified, where they're setting aside areas along rivers and lakes. And that is, in a lot of ways, part of our protected areas network as well, but we don't really recognize it.
I will say also that we, as Dan's alluded to, we work with corporations, we work with government, and collaboration is the watchword. Okay, thanks. On this side of the room, yes.
Thank you very much. This is for you, Karen. I think I'm a bit of a dumb cough. I didn't quite understand when you talked about accounting, like being able to put a price tag upon these very valuable things that are occurring in Conservancy. When you put a price tag on that, that is in order to say to people who want to go and rape the land, sorry, it's more important to let it stay with the good forest management combined with recreational, yada, yada, the things that you pointed out, as opposed to tearing it all apart and then building condos? Is that what, please help me out.
No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, if we look at the urban context, we are constantly faced now with development pressures as our cities grow, and yet we know that part of quality of life of a city and part of the economic vitality of a city is great quality of life in an urban setting,
Yes.
and a big part of that is urban green spaces. Unless you can come up with tools such as the one that we've worked on with the Nature Conservancy to say, okay, the development value of this is such, but the actual value provided by just maintaining it as an urban forest is equal to this.
Thank you.
Now you can compare apples to apples.
Thank you very much.
I think you've said through this process, Karen, that it informs better decision-making, right? So that's what we think. Yes?
I have an education question, kind of for anyone who is able to answer. I heard forest schools mentioned briefly, and I am training to be a forest school practitioner. And I know a lot of work is being done in Ottawa with the school board to support that sort of education. So I'm just wondering if the Nature Conservancy or TD even is doing anything to support the Toronto school boards.
You want to tackle that one, Dan?
Not specifically the Toronto School Board. Mark Stab, put your hand up, Mark.
Where is he?
Okay. You should talk to Mark Stab. Mark is our program manager for Central Ontario, and we do take kids out. We've had corporate programs before that are aimed at getting kids out into the forest. And we do have some properties that are fantastic to see that are close to the Toronto area.
Maybe,
Can I just make a comment? I think I come from Hamilton, grew up in Hamilton, know a lot about the city, and one of the things that I've noticed there is there's a growing interest in the schools about nature, about preserving the land around it. But what we're seeing is a pattern of that's happening in affluent neighborhoods. And in a lot of parts of the city where the communities don't have the support, where they don't have the luxury of a certain kind of parent involvement or fundraising that comes along, that we're not seeing that in all parts of the city. So I think the important thing is that this is a role where the government becomes really important to support across the board, so we don't create this sort of hierarchy of, because to me the great irony is often the schools that have developed all of this sort of preserving the nature around them are often in neighborhoods that already have access to green space and parks, and the inner city schools have nothing, and the school also has nothing, and are also the ones more likely to sell off land or whatever to be developed. So I think we need to be conscious of that these are places and spaces that are accessible across the community as well.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo what both of the panelists said. I just think it's so important. Our organization, we're not specifically working in Toronto, but we think that educating youth is so important, whether it's underserved communities in the inner cities or whether it's rural kids. It's something that we aspire to. I'd like to talk to you afterwards, so I know of an organization that might be able to help as well as NCC.
Hi, Mark here. We can chat
Introduction
later.
made.
I just want to tell a quick story related to that. One of the best things we can do is provide places where schools can go take their kids to visit a natural forest with trails and so on. And we've set up a number of programs where schools come out. They have very specific things they want to accomplish, things they want to experience. And we run these programs, but often the kids end up sort of at lunchtime running around, climbing a tree, falling over a log. And when we're looking at the teachers, it's time to get moving. They say, no, let them keep playing, right? And that is so rare for them to have those opportunities. So that's one of the best things we can provide is those sort of opportunities to visit the natural world. So we can chat later.
so maybe you can chat after the the event. On this side, please.
Yes. In Ontario, many of us know the Managed Forest Tax Incentive Program. Is that a good thing or a bad thing, and why?
Okay. So I'm not familiar with the specifics of that program, but generally I would think that when you can assist landowners in keeping their forests as forests, I think that's a good thing. So the way I understand other jurisdictions work is that if you're managing, if you have and we heard actually a similar question in Montreal, and I think there has to be a balance. So the example from Montreal was, unless the gentleman was developing his forest all the time, he wasn't getting a rebate on his taxes, and I don't think that's the right balance. I think what we should have is you should have a forest management plan for your forest. That forest management plan may be focused on recreation. It may be focused on wildlife conservation. It may include timber values or all of the above. And I think if you have a proper forest management plan designed for that forest, then I think that should be eligible for the appropriate tax incentive. But a tax incentive to keep forests, private forests as forests, absolutely. Mm-hmm. On the specifics, I'd have to talk to you about that.
Yeah, they seem to be geared primarily for foresting, but you can use those other reasons to keep it as a managed forest.
Yeah.
But they seem to be primarily around foresting.
Yeah, and so obviously from my talk, I'm interested in managed forests and getting products from forests, and I think you can have the right balance on those land bases. And forests, as Andrew pointed out, isn't static. They're not static, so they're always changing. So sometimes some degree of management's going to be needed, but I think having the right forest management plan for that property is the right place to start.
Agreed. Okay, thank you.
I'm conscious of time. We're going to take as many questions as we can. We've probably got about 5 minutes left, and then there is a reception afterwards, and you can mix and mingle and chat with some of the panelists at that point if we don't get to all your questions. Yes.
Hi there. My name's Matthew. I'm super passionate about environmental sustainability. The last 5 years of my life, I've literally scaled the globe, networking with people in green tech, clean tech, looking at all kinds of different sustainable development solutions, how we can sequester carbon with different technologies, how we can move away from crude oil, how we can create more jobs in sustainable industry. And I'm just curious, a question for all of you is, what do you guys think of hemp as an alternative and sustainable solution in terms of not even having to conserve forests anymore? Because if we can create new industries around things that aren't deforesting and cutting down trees, I'm curious, what you guys think of that? Have you looked into it? Is there funding coming forward for these types of things?
Who wants to tackle that? That's the first time we've had that question in this series.
I'll take a stab at that. So interestingly, hemp, of course, was the fuel of the British Navy, in that it provided the fiber for ropes for the British Navy that brought us here in many cases. So hemp, I think, has a valuable role as a fiber, just like forest fibers. The one thing so yes is the answer to the first part of your question. Of course, it's had a complicated history in North America because of the other products that developed from there.
What would those be?
I have no idea, Andrew. But the flip side of that is forests grow, they senesce, you can produce products from them. So I wouldn't want to turn a forest into a hemp patch necessarily. So I think the responsible land use and thinking about how we use our land is part of the question that you asked. And I'm all in favor of renewable resources.
Yeah, and I think I would just say that I think we're seeing more and more reconnecting with a variety, a much more diverse approach, right? So like going back and tapping into natural resources that in the past have been used sustainably and then forgotten about. So any kind of like always, any kind of diversity is good. But I agree, you wouldn't want to start, taking out forests to grow fields of hemp, right? But yeah.
Next question.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to have such an engaged and interesting conversation about something that's clearly so important, matters so much to all of us. Of course, there's been a lot of talk of antidotes to this nature deficit disorder, getting enough vitamin N, as Richard Liu likes to call it. So in Japan, a lot of us may have heard of a act or a practice called, I think it's something like Shinrin-yoku, loosely translated as forest bathing, and using the forest in a sense like a medicinal spa to alleviate the many symptoms, whether they be depression, anxieties, all these different things that can be often connected to a loss of time in a natural space. In terms of economic value as medicinal, you're finding more psychiatrists, psychologists, prescribing time in nature even in a standardized way to help people alleviate these symptoms, and more research being done on it. In terms of the money that can provide, to healthcare, and the tool that you were speaking about, measuring the value of forests, it seems as though that is a tool that is highly adaptable, that there are so many different ways that we can look at the economic value of a forest, that I would imagine that tool is not at all stagnant, and we're going to be discovering, there's always so much more research coming out about the way that forests are connected, about the way that they, use their resources within the entire system and things like that. I would like to hear you maybe discuss a little bit about that element in terms of using our societal structure of economy and really finding that core value of forests, even as a monetary value. How does that adapt?
So, the social value is something that is that I think we can all recognize, and in fact, we are starting to take a look at that. I think the challenge, if you want to do, it as a bank would do it, is you have to have really good data, and you have to be able to trace your data, and even the analysis that we've done with Dan and the crew, you need a lot of really good data. So we are looking to try to identify some way to measure wellness, but we haven't fully gotten there yet. But we all know that there is value. So it will be really fascinating to see how this side of it develops. It's a great comment.
Dan, did you want to mention for just a moment, and we have raised this in other sessions, why forests make us feel good?
Well, so I didn't really believe this at first, right? Because like I'm a scientist, and I kind of thought, well, you know, I know being outside makes you feel better, and they used to send people up to Algonquin Park to the sanatoriums to kind of get rid of disease. But there is this increasing body of evidence that when you go into a forest and you breathe in deeply, and what you smell, it's not just a smell. I mean, these are actual chemical compounds with names like pinene and terrapin, and they are actually going into your lungs, they're going into your bloodstream and into your brain, and they are affecting your mood, your behavior,
Cortisol.
and your health. And it is a real thing. As Karen said, you know, I don't know if we have the tools to put an economic value on that yet, but man, like not being depressed and feeling great, that would seem like that's a high value for me. Yeah.
Andrew, did you?
Yeah, I just I wanted to comment. Something came up in one of the other panels too. Was this sort of awareness that much of the natural world is a very humanized, right? So in the video earlier, there was this comment about safe and nature, or nature used to be risky or dangerous. The example was falling out of a tree, but nature, you know, can be quite risky and dangerous for humans. So I don't always mean to be the pain in the neck or poking at things, but it's like a real consciousness that what often people think of as the natural is a really highly humanized alternatural system. So we're not encountering wolves and bears and all of these creatures that should be there with us. And I always kind of have that in the back of my mind when we talk about nature as something, going for these placid, tranquil walks in the woods, that we're also moving through a natural world that we've highly altered to suit ourselves, right?
Thanks.
I'm sure it's good for bears to walk around in the woods, too.
Sorry?
And sort of like Richard was saying, you know, it's not just about the child not being strong enough and falling from the tree. It's about building the child, building our senses, building our relationship with the oftentimes chaotic natural world around us so that we can better live in it. Thank you very much.
I'm going to take one more question. Those at the microphone, please forgive me, but we will be able you'll be able to ask your questions to the panelists after the formal event has finished. On this side, please.
Thank you. This question is for Andrew Hunter. Andrew, can you direct us to artists outside the group of 7 who can help us to celebrate forests?
Sure. Yeah, there are, one of the things I always talk about is that there are many, many artists outside of the group of 7. And the group of 7, you know, is a kind of a heavy weight on. So I would encourage people to look at, not so much about the celebration, but to think about artists who are actually engaging with the contemporary world that we live in. So when you think about an artist like Ed Bertinsky, for example, through his photography is really drawing people's awareness towards the state of the natural world and how it's being altered. His latest project on the Anthropocene is a really fascinating project through photography and film. Bonnie Devine, who's an Anishinaabe artist who has a major work here at the AGO, I would encourage you to go look at, which looks at the transformation of the national world through colonization. I would say another good example. There's like many, many artists that are working in a diversity of media. And that's the other thing that I would stress is like to look, one of the things that's come with the group of 7, and it's kind of hung over Canadian art, is that everybody thinks of Canadian art as painting. And that so remarkable history of artists in this country who through writing, through film, through performance, through sculpture, through video, all of these forms have been dealing with the natural systems. So I could probably give you like an epic list, but I would say the first thing is to just is to make a point when you come to a place like the AGO. This is going to sound like a bizarre thing to say. If any of my board members are here, we can talk after, but maybe don't go look at the group of 7 first. Maybe actually go and look at the contemporary works, look at the works by particularly contemporary Indigenous artists, to see a perspective on this place that is both celebratory but critical. And I think that's important. So,
thank you.
Thank you all for your participation and for your questions. We will continue the conversation. We'll just continue it in clusters, maybe with a glass of wine, and that will further energize the conversation, I'm sure. Remember, just as we got started, I mentioned that we'd like to take you on a virtual walk in the woods this evening. Well, we have an augmented reality station to share with you. And I think it's over in this far side of the room. Can you wave? Great, thank you. The staff at the back of the room, we have 4 stations ready to guide you through a virtual walk in the woods at Bacchus Woods. And that's a real forest conserved through the help of the TD Forest Partnership. And the setup will be available for about the next hour. So you can mix and mingle and chat and discuss what you've heard tonight, and also pop over to the augmented reality station and get a chance to take a look at that forest. Before we go, I'd like to thank the speakers for generously providing your time and your knowledge through this entire series. Thank you very much. Indeed, thank you. If I could ask you to share a round of applause for the great staff of Fire Dog and the staff here at the AGO. The hospitality, Andrew, has been amazing. Thank you. Thank you again to our sponsor, TD, for investing in nature and for making this evening possible. And thank you to you, the audience, for joining us this evening, for making time to come out and join us tonight, and for more importantly, for being people that support the conservation of our most important natural places. Give yourselves a round of applause.